Well, here we are, folks. Final one of the day. So you've been waiting for this guest. I'll tell you who it is in a minute. But the Tommy Cooker, the Ronson, it is frequently said that of all the World War II tanks, the most common to blow up, doing it every day, you just had to look at it and it would catch fire, was the Sherman tank. Well, he's debunked this elsewhere, but he's going to debunk it on World War II TV today. We have the Chieftain, Nicholas Moran, to talk about this. So there we go. Good afternoon. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing well enough. It's another happy day here in Central Texas, where I'm actually wearing long sleeves. I don't need to be wearing long sleeves, but anyway, I mean, I don't understand why people live north of like Dallas. It's not worth it. There's a reason I moved away from Ireland. I go back to Ireland over the Christmas holidays very frequently. It's kind of, how did I end up growing up here?
Oh well, but anyway,
I've grown weak in my old age.
I'm the same when I go back to England. I find it's the in the winter in England. It's the dark at 4 o'clock. I can't deal with anymore. But anyway, the Sherman tank and all this is one of the most established myths that, despite the fact that people are constantly debunking it, it won't go away. So I know you've had to say this many times, but you know, where does it all start from? I mean, the Ronson thing is a post-war construction. That tagline they lied every time wasn't until post-war. But where did it all start? Unravel it all for us, if you wouldn't mind.
To be clear, there actually was a very similar tagline that Ronson had in the 1920s, but media back then isn't the same as media today. So I mean, if you go to somebody today and you go back for an advert maybe 20 years ago, and I don't know when the advert was for Dijon mustard. I mean, sir, do you have any Grey Poupon? People nowadays understand the reference because it's on YouTube and it comes back and back and back. But in if an advert from the 1920s which said one flick and it's lit, I think it was, it's going to be out, generally speaking, of the common frame of reference for somebody in the 40s. Yeah. So yes, there was a Ronson thing, but there's no indication, certainly not in the US anyway, that there was any connection to it. And Americans like Zippos anyway. So when they did eventually make a Sherman tank that was involved fire. It was called the Zippo. But regardless, I mean, you do have to be careful about going too far the other way when you're dealing with these myths.
Yeah.
So the counter proposal isn't Sherman didn't burn. It did, but everything burned. Yeah. And that was one of the things. So if you look at the term Tommy Cooker, and the Germans called it Tommy Cookers, did they? Is there a document? There is documentary evidence from the time that said the vehicles were called Tommy Cookers, from the British side apparently. So when Sherman showed up, where did it show up? It showed up in Egypt in the summer. Egypt is a little bit warm around that time of year, and a Sherman does not have air conditioning. In fact, no tanks of the time have air conditioning. And if you're sitting in this big metal box, the sun is beating down on you, you are sitting in an oven. You are getting cooked. So apparently, from this one reference at the time, any British tank was referred to as a Tommy Cooker. If you're in a Valentine, if you're in a Crusader, because you couldn't open up the hatch all that much, not like a German tank where you can actually get a cross breeze. You open up the gunner side, you open up the loader side, and you can actually get a bit of a cross breeze going through if you had to. Allied tanks didn't have that option, so it was referred to by the British as Tommy Cookers. And because again, remember, we'll say Joe for an American GI, and in the UK it's Toms or Tommies. And I was talking to a British officer yesterday at a conference, and he's referred, we had the officers, and then we had the Toms over here. It's a British thing. So that seems to be the origin of the term Tommy Cooker. Now, when it comes to fires, there's another slight difference here, and that is the M4 is the first tank that the Allies use, the Western Allies, I guess I should say, which has an ammo load which basically consists of nothing but high caliber ammunition. So the British before then, they got a little 2-pounder gun. I mean, the round for a 2-pounder, I don't know. I mean, this is a 30 millimeter, so a little bit bigger than this, whatever. And it doesn't have very much explosives in it. not too much propellant. And then you go to the 6-pounder, which, okay, yeah, it's yay big. It's about yay big, but it still only has so much propellant. When the Americans show up with the M3 medium, it has 75 millimeter rounds, which have a lot of explosive in them, comparatively speaking, and a lot of propellant. But the M3 also has a more likely part that you're going to hit. It's a small turret up top and the area around that small turret, which has the 37 millimeter ammunition. Yet all of a sudden, we now have this tank that if you hit inside pretty much anywhere, you are likely to hit ammunition. The 75 millimeter round. And it is big. There's only so much space in a tank. There's only so many places you can place ammunition. And the sponsons are usually a good place to put ammunition. Now, the T-34 didn't do that. T-34, they had fuel tanks in between the sponsons and so on. The ammo was down on the floor. But look where the ammo is stored on a Panther. Look where the ammo is stored on a Tiger, a Panzer IV, a Crusade. The ammo is in the sponsons. There's nowhere else really to put it if you want to get it easily. So the penetrations are coming through. They're hitting the M4, and they're setting off the ammunition. Now, in January of 1943, the Americans back home in the U.S. are getting hits getting information back saying, hey, look, Sherman seems to be getting a bit of a reputation for fire. And the figure was something like 60 to 70% of M4s were burning. Which, as I say, is about the same, give or take a few percent for Crusaders, Panzer IVs, what have you, Panthers. Why is this happening? Why are we getting these reports back, say then? And so in February of 43, they do tests. They say, okay, look, here's what we're going to do. We are going to put a couple of M4s down the range, and we're going to shoot at it. And we're going to see what happens. And we're going to aim specifically at different parts of the tank and see what happens. And you have the image, kind of the conclusion of the test results there, if you want to bring that up. And it basically says fires in tank turrets are started by hot fragments penetrating the cartridge cases of complete rounds. And it says, Aberdeen came to the same tests the year before. Now, it does say that ammunition in the engine compartment may be caused by ignition and gasoline leaking from fluid. Now, the thing about diesel versus gasoline or petrol, as you want, that's all. You can pull the slide down now again. Is when people are talking about the Sherman being the death trap or the Tommy Cooker, it's implying that you are inside the tank when the vehicle is on fire. Now, if the engine compartment has started fire, and you pull the fire extinguishers and so on. That image is still up, by the way, for some reason on my screen. You are going to get out. I mean, realistically speaking, you're going to get out of the tank. So it doesn't matter if the tank overall burns. What's more important is whether or not the crew is still in the tank when it is burning. And so the whole diesel versus petrol thing is a little bit redundant, shall we say, when you're talking about that sort of thing. And so that's why they started their wet stowage program and a few other things. So by the time the war is over, if you shot a wet stowage M4, it only burned one time out of 10. It was fantastic. Now, there were, again, if you look in the archives, you are going to see complaints or statements of preference about the M4 diesel versus the M4 petrol / gasoline. And it is true that when an engine compartment gets hit or a gas tank gets hit, and if something is going to leak, the petrol is more likely to catch fire. But that is a slightly different problem to whether or not you are going to catch fire in the field. And the end result was that the Army decided, okay, look, we'll try as best as possible to keep this simple. We'll do nothing but petrol engines, gasoline engines. So we'll stick with the A3 and the A1 as our production variants, or the radial engine and the V8. The M10 kept the diesel engine, but the M10 diesel was really picked just more for the sake of practicality and availability. So when you go to the M10A1, which is basically turns into the M36 tank destroyer, that's a gasoline engine as well. And the advantages of range, they existed, but they weren't as there was a lot more cost benefit to a diesel engine in the 1930s due to the qualities of fuel and efficiencies and so on. So the Army decided we're going to keep with gasoline, and they made a very conscious decision, apparently, that the hazards of using gasoline as your fuel system are outweighed by all the other benefits you have of not using gasoline, of not using diesel. So what, if that benefit is I can go faster, which is why the Germans don't use diesel in their tanks. It's more better performance for a set amount of time. If the benefit is I can go faster and I'm more likely to survive because you're going to miss me, or I can maneuver better, or I can shoot better, or whatever, then that is a fair trade-off. Okay. So I think I just ranted on about that for like 5 minutes as I'm scrolling back. All the models in the background. Yeah,
my question is that well, one of my questions. Yeah. Some of these myths we've been tackling in this series are completely post-war constructs. So they're just, conspiracy theorists arguing about stuff after time. But this one did affect, in a sense, how British and Commonwealth troops and Americans went into combat. David O'Keefe said earlier on, I saved his comment, the myth had real consequences on the sharp end. Decisions are made in Normandy based on the myth. So, would you agree that that fear of burning in a Sherman absolutely influences command decisions later on in the war?
Command decisions versus troop decisions, I think, is your difference here.
Okay, or
because the commanders were there, they're reading the test reports. They have access to this. They get the briefings. Generals get briefings. And the engineers are all saying, look, all these things that you were trying to do to stop being in a tank which explodes, like adding tracklings, adding sandbags, they cause more harm than good. And the generals are there going, got it, understand it. Joe doesn't care what the engineers say. Joe just cares about getting to the next day.
Yeah.
And if that means that he's going to slow his tank down and overweight a tank or whatever, as long as he feels like he's going to survive better, he's going to. So this came up many years ago with a panel I did with Zaloga, Doyle, Fletcher, and so on. And Doyle mentioned that the Germans had the same problem. So you'll see pictures, especially mid-early war, of, let's say, Sturmgeschütz with concrete armor. There's one above it. You go to Bobby, you look at their Sturmgeschütz, they've got concrete armor.
Yeah. Or
logs or things like that. And the Germans came to the same conclusion. The Germans basically said, look, what we have on your tank is the best. Our engineers aren't idiots. This is the best answer you're going to get. Except the Germans were a little bit more disciplined about it. And when the German general said, don't bloody do it, they didn't. The one exception in the US was Patton. And I'm not a Patton fan, but in this case I will be. Because he was pretty rigid about, do not put all this crap on your tank. It'll slow you down. It'll make you an easier target. You'll break down more often. And there is a photograph of he had a unit cross-attached, and this cross-attached unit had purpose-built sandbag racks and so on. And he has just chewed out this poor tank crew. And he's coming back fuming, and the tank crew's in the background kind of going, what the fuck was that? Sorry.
You can swear. Don't worry.
And the one exception that he did allow was he did allow armor quality steel to be added to the tank. Now, again, the engineers in the US were looking at this going, this is not ideal. So they end up making the jumbo, which is additional armor. It's basically double thickness armor steel, but they also have to change the engineering, the final drive ratios. And they put in the test notes, this is not a medium tank. This is used for limited operation on good terrain. We can't make thousands of these things and turn our new medium tank into something with double the armor. Excuse me. And so the debate wasn't between the commanders and anybody else. The debate was really amongst the crew as to whether or not they wanted to do this. But they did. They put all this stuff on their tank. They did slow down their tanks. And in many cases, it made matters worse, either because they're aiding the penetration, because the soft steel of the the unarmored track link, it was like this: the round comes in, it'll bite into the soft steel, turn inwards a little bit, and then all of a sudden you're now more perpendicular to the actual armor plate.
Right.
Or sandbags is kind of, okay, well, we haven't quite figured out shaped charge yet. This is a relatively new concept, and some of the shaped charge warheads had a standoff distance was actually longer than what the fuse provided. But you put a sandbag on the end, unless it's got the exact correct material on the inside. And the U.S. Army checked this. They said, oh, look, it's got to have at least twice the density of sand, of this grain sand, in order to be of practical use. And of course, you're not going to get fine industrial sand or twice the density of fine industrial sand when you're filling a sandbag on the side of the road in Normandy. So that turned out to be more of a harm than good as well.
Well, I think we will bring things in a minute because the idea of these to be short and snappy. But as someone who spends a lot of time talking about tanks, is this water off a duck's back, this myth to you now, or does it get you annoyed? Does it come up all the time in conversations? Where does it sit for you?
It doesn't get me annoyed because I know that the myth is out there and so pervasive. And if people are reading the pop culture, especially pop culture as of about 15 to 20 years ago, it's what they have. I mean, hell, when I was growing up, I was of that ilk and thinking Panther was a great tank and Sherman was an inferior tank until I actually got into it and started doing the research. And then I realized, it's not. So I asked the Panzer Museum director, what did the Germans think of Sherman? I mean, when they tested it, and said, their tank's like our tank. It's got good points. It's got bad points. It's a tank. They're just different good points and different bad points.
Yeah.
Make it that way you will. The only other myth that's out there that I really wish would go away was tanks were not designed to fight other tanks, and they absolutely were. It's in the manual. You look at the history of the development of the 76 millimeter gun. There was nothing out there that the 75 couldn't kill, but they gave it to 76 anyway, just in case. And that's a little bit unfortunate. I think there's two reasons for that. One is because the tank destroyer branch exists, and by definition, if you've got a tank destroyer, well, its job is to destroy tanks. And people think, well, that makes it its exclusive job is to destroy tanks. And the other part of the reason for that misconception, I think, is that when the myth came out that American tanks were terrible, they had to find a justification as to why this myth existed. So it wasn't designed to be a tank fighter. And they'll look at, here's what General McNair said. He was the head of Army Ground Forces, which is perfectly true. But he trusted his subordinates. So when he invented the tank destroyer concept, he was basically the leader of the tank destroyer concept. As far as he was concerned, he wanted towed guns. He thought the towed gun was going to be the master of the tank. He appoints Colonel Bruce, who becomes Brigadier General Bruce, to be the head of Tank Destroyer Command. Bruce looks at it. His team looks at it and says, no, we need self-propelled guns. We need basically, they're like little tanks, which was completely against what McNair wanted. But McNair basically said, look, you're the guys in charge. This is what you think is what's needed. I will let you run with it. And he let them run with it. When Pershing was deployed, McNair was not in favor of Pershing, especially not at the early stage of development that it was in when it first went overseas. But there's a line here where he raised his objection once. About 8 weeks later, he was overruled. And he's on record basically saying, look, the decision has been made. I don't like it, but the decision is made. We are going to support this decision. And off it went. So I'm going to have an entire different talk on McNair. What was it called? I did it at the Museum of the American GI. It's on my channel somewhere. And
McNair is always worth talking about.
He was a genius. He needs a lot better press than he's been having up until now. And you can say the same of Percival Hobart as well. I would say is another very underrated general, and Jake Devers, who I can't think of many other generals or admirals or whatever that were both excellent in their administrative, rear echelon role, and also had successful field command. Yeah, he was Devers in charge of 7th Army Group down in. He was like Bradley's equivalent in south of France. Before that, he developed armored force. Nobody talks about him.
Good point. So my final question for you, which could be a massive rabbit hole, is, I grew up like you did. The German stuff was better than the American stuff. The British stuff was all crap, and the German stuff was put on this massive pedestal. The swing has started, and now it's, the Sherman was good. The Sherman, The problem is, what if it swings too far the way? Because I'm already starting to see everyone now saying all the German stuff was completely shit. It broke down all the time. So will we have to put up with the era where it swings back the other way for the needle to come back in the middle of summer? Or are we always going to be swinging from one side to the other?
I think it's going to be one side to the other, unfortunately. But all we can do is try to eventually slow down the length of swing. So, I mean, I have a video on Tiger, and I have it's called A Very Controversial Opinion on Tiger. And I say, no, it wasn't a wonder tank, but it was a perfectly good tank for what it was supposed to do. The only problem was the Germans didn't have the opportunity to use it in the manner it was originally intended.
Right.
But I mean, that's a far different thing from Oddball's driver Moriarty going, "It's a piece of junk."
Exactly. Yeah.
It wasn't a piece of junk. The Germans knew what they were building when they were building it.
And of course, the other thing is, well, now where we had a generation of people who'd actually driven in, used, crewed these tanks, we'll then have generations of people who haven't done that, but they kind of have done it because they've done it in all the World of Tanks online versions. So they will have the experience of being a tank commander, except it's in a virtual world. And these games, I know, you get involved in this, they can only keep up with where the research is right now. So they're probably kind of swinging back and forth in their game dynamic.
And even at that, the problem is that you're just taking a small subset of the capability. So this came up in the Army conference. It was that 2 days ago. It's kind of like it was a problem that the Ukrainians were having getting through minefields. And because what we're looking at and what all the footage we're getting is just a little narrow vision from a UAV on a single tank. And let's say it's got a Rhine roller, it drives forward and it hits a mine and blows up or gets shot, whatever. But that's not how you breach a minefield. And it never has been back in World War II to today. There's a whole orchestra of combined effects that are supposed to be happening. We have no idea about anything else that is affecting it. So all the things that make the M4 good don't show up in a video game to a very large extent. Unless it is a very high-end level video game along the lines of, I don't know, like the Operational Art of War or something that includes logistics and large-scale maneuver, operational level maneuver. That's where the M4 really excelled. And, the higher level of war is just as important as the lower level of war. You just don't get the personal first-person experience when you do.
Well, we'll leave the things there because A, you've got things to do. B, I've been sitting here, my arse has gone numb over 3 hours. And B, all good things must come to an end. But we will invite you back in the future.
Thank you. I'm just going to answer Sean Brennan's about Panzer's transmission problems. A lot of them were fixed, but Jägerpanther had a better transmission gears. They were physically better gears, more robust gears. And for whatever reason, that improvement was never never sent over to the MAN factory that was building regular Panthers. So even though better gears existed, the manufacturing for them at the Panther factory did not.
Right.
And that's why Jägerpanther, you don't get quite the same level of reputation of the thing just breaking down every time you try to neutral steer or whatever. But Panther did even after the war. So I just wanted to see that there. Okay, but otherwise, yes, absolutely. I'm always good to come back.
Yeah, we'll do another one because and I also need to go and do something no one else can do for me. I'm touching cloth here. So
I'm not seen as the tanker solution of a bottle.
I could do that. That's too much information for the World War II TV audience, but brilliant. It's been great talking to you, folks. These have been fantastic. I will see you all again from tomorrow for another round of them and some more on Saturday. So cheers, everybody. Thanks for your fantastic comments. See you all again tomorrow. Cheers.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.